Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF's Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Michael Clowater, a writer and director whose first feature, Drive Back Home, stars Alan Cumming and Charlie Creed Miles as Pearlie and Weldon. Estranged brothers forced back together when Pearlie is arrested in Toronto, and Weldon has to drive 1,000 miles from New Brunswick to bail him out and bring him home. Based on a story from Michael's own family history, it's a small, lovely study of understanding and reconciliation, and it's now playing in theaters across Canada. You should check it out. Michael picked another first feature, The Station Agent, Tom McCarthy's 2003 indie starring Peter Dinklage as Finbar McBride, a man who inherits a disused train depot in Newfoundland, New Jersey, moves there to be alone with himself, and soon runs into two other similarly isolated people, Olivia, a recently divorced woman played by Patricia Clarkson, and Joe, a food truck operator played by Bobby Cannavale. And slowly, maybe even against Finn's will, these people start forming connections with each other. It's a tiny, measured, perfect little drama. And even though it would be another decade before Spotlight minted Tom McCarthy as an Oscar winner, those of us who saw The Station Agent knew he'd get there eventually. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I think generally, I really love stories about people trying to figure themselves out. You know what I mean? Like, I think the older I get, the more I think life is about changing and growing. And those things happen in really small, like incremental steps, right? And so what I love are films that make those little small steps and make like a mountain out of them. You know what I mean? What feels like a very nothing thing to do is actually a whole big story, because it's so hard internally to do that. And it winds up being almost this kind of philosophical story. And, you know, one of the things that I love about The Station Agent is that I think the arc of Finn is literally just a guy who wants to be alone, right? And he needs to not be alone. And that's kind of it. And that's sort of that's the whole film. And I'm a giant fan of Thomas McCarthy. And so, yeah, I mean, that's one of the, I don't know, I don't know how many times I've watched the film. Like, I've watched it so many times, and I really connect with it because, you know, I think that a lot of people probably connect with it because, you know, finding friends as an adult is hard. And I think we all felt that really during the pandemic. You know what I mean? Like how alone we were, you know? And I think, one article I read was The Station Agent was one of these films that actually did get rediscovered by a lot of people in the pandemic. And I think that's because that's what that film is about. It's about connection and how difficult that is, but how important it is. And it just, I don't know, you can call it a feel-good movie if you want, but but that's what it is. It's a movie about connection. And I think during the pandemic, we needed that connection. I think that's why people end up rediscovering it. And I always like films that are like that. Like, for me, during the pandemic, there was a TV show called The Detectorists.
Oh yeah,
and I rewatched that 2 or 3 times because that's all that film is. It's almost like a fantasy TV show about having a grown-up friend, and you play with them in the same way you would with a 6-year-old, you know, when you were 6, you know. So that's why I love The Station Agent. It kind of acknowledges how easy it is to hide in loneliness and how hard it is to climb out of that. And I think everyone in it is brilliant.
It's the kind of movie that no one took seriously the first time around, which I thought was really interesting. It is the sort of small, delicate film that gets rediscovered in exactly the way you described. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic is the perfect frame for it because it is about the futility of isolation and how, you know, like nobody wants that. You can be an introvert, but being a hermit is crossing a line. Right. And I remember at the time, Miramax was selling it at TIFF in 2003 with the idea that, oh, you know, like it's a revelation. It's a new kind of movie. And our pushbacks were all just like, no, it's just a really good movie. You don't, just because it stars a little person, it doesn't mean, or, you know, specifically now, Peter Dinklage. Yes, it was a breakout for Peter Dinklage in that it was a lead role for him. And suddenly this actor who'd been in a bunch of stuff could be seen in a dimensional performance and have secrets from the audience and slowly invite us in and warm up to the screen, to the people in the movie, and let the audience warm up to Finn, the character. And it is a great performance. And as you say, like, everybody's terrific in this. The casting is dead on. Michelle Williams is in it for 10 minutes and is incredible. And Patricia Clarkson and Bobby Cannavale, who I'm pretty sure is playing a role written for Joey Tribbiani, but it makes it interesting, right? Like, his bright-eyed enthusiasm. It took me about 2 screenings to realize what he was doing, because it's a much more superficial performance than Cannavale usually delivers. But if it's a Tom McCarthy film, there's clearly a reason for it, and he's just that unconditional person. He's just a happy person who wants more friends.
It's funny because, like, whenever, like, listening back to like reviews or people talking about the films, like, everyone talks about Peter Dinklage, everyone talks about Patricia Clarkson. The performance I think is really amazing is Bobby Cannavale's performance in this. Like, he's basically playing a puppy dog.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, is what he's doing. And what I love about it is, like, I heard a quote somewhere, I'm going to get this a little bit wrong, but it said, like, loneliness is something that's best handled with other people. You know what I mean? And I know I didn't say that perfect, but it's something along those lines. And what I like is each of these characters have this loneliness. You know, like Finn's character, you know, he's chosen loneliness, right? Because it's a shield for him, you know, like, through all the thing. Joe's character he's had loneliness thrust upon him. Like, I sort of presume he lived in Manhattan or someplace, you know, before the film starts, and he has to go back to look after his dad, and he doesn't connect with anyone in town, and he just doesn't have anyone. And then Patricia Clarkson is dealing with this trauma and this sorrow, and that's where she's coming. And so they all come at it from different places, and you need that Joe character to be the puppy dog, to be like, hey, are you guys doing something later? Like, if you're doing something, can I come? Like, we're not doing anything. Yeah, but if you do, can I come? You know, and he's like, and there's a great line he says in one of those things where he goes, what are you gonna do after? I'm just gonna go for a walk. He goes, oh, can I come with you? And he's like, no, I like walking by myself. And he's like, oh, I'm a good walker, bro. You know, like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, he's this perfect, like, for me, the writing is what's so clever about it. But he's like this perfect person that Finn would push against. Like, he's a scary looking person. He's like a dude or a bro or, you know, whatever. And that's exactly the opposite of those are the things that Finn fears. And so, you know, I just think it's such a great performance of his.
Yeah, I think that might have been the first time I just sort of recognized Cannavale. And he's fun, he's loose, he's completely present. But you're right, he's a golden retriever. He has to be walked all the time. And that's the shared responsibility that bonds Olivia and Finn. They have to take care of this idiot who's going to run into traffic if they're not careful.
I was watching the director's commentary on it, and he's wearing like a Miami basketball jersey throughout most of it. And he owned that when he was 14. That's his own jersey. So that was like what he wore as a little boy. And so that was part of why he wore that, because he was basically playing it like he was like a little boy.
Yeah. And they do build a very clear family relationship with, you know, there is the other aspect of Olivia having just lost a child and lost a relationship. Like, her marriage has collapsed because of this thing, which is apparently horribly common, that most relationships don't survive the death of a child. And she's looking for someone to take care of. And that sets up an entirely believable but really uncomfortable subplot that runs through the second act of the film, and even the third. But the sense that no one character in this film offers everything to someone else, that the triangle that forms, and it's not a romantic triangle in any way, it's a supportive triangle, but each is it arm of the triangle, each leg of the, I can never remember this. I've failed math, but each side of the triangle
Right.
is incapable of supporting both of the other sides,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
similarly needs both of the other sides to support it. The thing that strikes me so much about it now is how small and delicate and unobtrusive the story is. Really, there's nothing here. It's just about, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, it's a purely observational film. There's no goal. There's no ticking clock. There's no, like for a little while, I was worried about how the depot was going to get endangered and they'd all have to get together, because that it feels like that kind of movie in the first 10 minutes. And then you realize the depot is just sort of an excuse. I
Hmm.
don't think we ever see a train actually use it. Finn
No,
is,
no, I don't think trains use it. They drive by, they go by it, but they don't use it. But that's sort of what I was talking about at the beginning, like about stories where people are trying to figure themselves out and how that is a monumental task, even
Mhm.
when it's something that's small. And one of the things I think is really interesting in this, to your point, is like they're all slowly becoming friends. And one of the things I love about it so much is how authentic and slow that process is. Like it's very, very superficial in the beginning. Like Olivia is trying to help Finn, but she's doing it for these like sort of weird reasons. Like I want someone to look after. He's safe. I can tell him this thing about my son. And because I don't really care about him, and maybe even I don't really respect him, it's a safe place for me to say a secret, or a feeling that I have. And then when that friendship starts to become, and then they become friends, and it's kind of fun, and like beef jerky on the tracks, and all of that kind of stuff. But then the second it becomes real, now she's out, and now she's like, I'm not your friend. And she literally says the words to him, like, I'm not your friend. And one of the things that I think is good is that being a friend isn't just about having good times with people. It's not about laughing. It's just about this. Being a friend is like being there for people in those hard times. Like that kind of connection is what solidifies friendships, and it solidifies, love, right? And it's not always fun. And the story, I think, if you plot it out, it feels almost like a super slow moving action movie where it's like, it has all those beats of like, I read, I don't want to be your friend. Okay, I'm your friend. Okay, well now we're having fun. Oh, a hard thing happened. What am I gonna do? Now I'm not gonna do the hard thing. Now I'm forced to do it. And it sort of goes on like that. And that's what I think, if they did have something where like the train depot burned down, or it just would be so irrelevant to the story. I think it's just about these three people struggling to make a real connection with somebody, because those superficial connections are the ones we make all the time. And again, I think that's what people connect with in the movie, because it's that real connection that's the hard part. The superficial connections are easy. Like we all make those all the time. It's just, how many people do we have in our lives that we can really call a friend? And I think that's why these movies resonate with people, because I think most people don't have a lot.
Yeah. No, I mean, especially as an adult, you can count on generally on one or two hands
Hmm.
the number of new people in your lives. I feel like I've been really lucky that way. And this is what the station agent does beautifully. It's a thing that involves making, like, bonding with someone as an adult involves letting go of that part of self-consciousness of yourself and allowing yourself to just exist with the other
Right.
person as friends,
Yeah.
and with no expectations, or with, there's, you can find a shared interest or something like that, but none of these three people has anything in common at all
Hmm.
except the hole in their hearts,
That's
which,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
And,
which they're all hiding, which they're all doing their very best not to reveal. And so
right.
those stages of relaxation and honesty are just so beautifully played out.
Yeah. And one of the things Thomas McCarthy talks about too is that he sees it as like a Western film. You know what I mean? Like he sort of shot it and themed it like a Western. And I think that goes to what you were saying earlier about like, it seems like nothing's happening, but if you frame it like it's this big epic Western, like The Searchers or something like that,
Mhm.
then there is a big thing happening. It's just a small thing, but they're treating it like it's big. And one of the things I really, if you look at it this way, like if you look at the music is all like guitar and harmonica, and it has that like train kind of Johnny Cash rhythm to it, you know,
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, that Stephen Trask music. Um, but it's like it's a stranger that comes to town, right?
Yeah.
And the whole town is talking about him, you know, and it has like all of these Western tropes to it. Um, and I think what what Thomas McCarthy talks about in some of his interviews is like that allows him to like those archetypes of the and tropes of the story is what allows him to take a really tiny thing that's happening and make it feel like it's a big thing. And I think that's my connection to it, because the content of what they're talking about is something that is really important to me, but it's not boring because it's being sort of respected, like this is huge and it's hard and it's difficult and we're going on an adventure together, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's honest about the stakes too. I think that
Yeah. Yeah.
there are no illusions in this movie. Nobody's going to
Mhm.
get fixed. They're just
Right.
going to start healing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
I've interviewed McCarthy a couple of times over the years, and he is just so um he sees himself as a journeyman. Like I don't think he
Hmm.
sees himself as an auteur, as an artist, and it's probably because he's
Hmm.
also an actor and has to get pulled into other people's work all the time.
Hmm.
I the first time I met him, it was for the Win Win press tour and his film with Giamatti, and I had to admit in the first 5 minutes, it's like I don't know why I'm on edge with you, and then I realized it was because of The Wire, where he played the least ethical
Right.
journalist in history, and I hated that character so much. It's like I love your
Right.
work, but I kind of want to deck you. And he said, like that's what I do, and I am sorry.
Hmm.
Like he throws himself into something and just inhabits that role, and then has to deal. How did he put it? He has to deal with the consequences for the rest of his career. And
Right.
this was before Spotlight, and
Uh,
that kind of like the Best Picture win and the Best Screenplay win legitimizes him as a filmmaker. But he just wants to do the stuff as a filmmaker, as a writer and director that he doesn't do as an actor,
hmm.
which I
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating. Like
Yeah.
he's not interested in casting himself. He's not interested in mythologizing himself. He just wants to tell a story that he can't act in, that no one will cast him in.
Hmm.
And with this, like it's a statement of principle as a filmmaker. It's just like, I am not going to use my connections to make something flashy. And I'm not going to try to establish myself as a visionary. I just want to tell this story. And
Yeah.
because of that, there's no, it is show don't tell in that all of the real emotional work is on the actors' faces.
Hmm.
There's maybe half of a big speech in the whole picture, but his lack of showmanship, he just wants to get out of the way of this story in his head. I think that's why his work is so strong, because it doesn't call attention to itself and it doesn't insist on how great these performances are. It just shows us
Hmm.
those. That
Yeah.
work is there.
And I the sense I get, I've not met him, but the sense I get is that he comes at this stuff as a writer first.
Absolutely.
And when you do that, you know, everything becomes about efficiency and telling a story. You know, like I work in advertising. I do commercials, and you know, a piece of advice a guy gave me when I first started is he said, if you're writing a 30-second TV commercial, do it like this. Like imagine you were at a bar and somebody says, you know, pitch me something. You have 30 seconds and I'll buy you a beer. You know what I mean? If you let me do this. And so, and then it's just, you're just telling a story to a person. Like I'm telling a story to you. How do you do that in the most efficient way possible? And, and what's necessary and what's not necessary in it. And I think what I love about all of his films is they're so simple and they have a, a point, or they have but like a spine to it,
Mhm.
that's the important part, and it's just tell that part, and then you can build up all the things around in doing that, but there isn't anything extraneous in it. It's just, you know, what is the story I want to make? It's like, is Finn going to be able to accept people as friends, you know, or something like that. um and yeah, that's it. And he does a ton of research as well, so that he knows that world, you know. So
Yeah, I'm convinced that he knows as much as Finn does about trains. There's this little undercurrent about how Finn just likes trains, but he loves them, right? Like it's a thing he won't admit to anybody else, how much he cares about literally anything.
Right.
And I don't doubt that McCarthy has like 17 reference books on top of his desk every time he starts writing that script.
Well, what he said in an interview about it is like, I think his brother-in-law moved to Newfoundland in New Jersey, and he saw that train depot, and he wound up talking to the guy that owned it, and he was a guy who was into trains. And he said he did so much research on trains before he started writing that he almost at one point felt like it was getting in the way because it was stopping him from writing, because he was just researching that stuff so much. And, there's these little things that Finn says that are so inside train language. And yeah, it's like, those are the kinds of things that give it this authenticity and reality to it. That when you're watching it, it's just like you recognize the people, like whether it's like trains or whether it's hockey or anything else, when you see that passion for somebody, it's attractive. Or the passion that someone has, it's attractive quality.
Yeah. Well, what do they call them in the UK? Anoraks. People who are sort of relegated to it's people who wear big heavy parkas and shamble around talking about their interests until you want to go away. But I think that's a different culture. That's like pub culture, where someone will come up to you and start bothering you about something pointless.
Yeah.
But Finn's whole thing is never to share, right? Like when we meet him, he doesn't disclose anything that isn't essential to the moment. He never talks about his interests. He knows all this stuff and he wants to be left alone with his knowledge, which again, there's like a miserly quality to him, which is another way that the film, that the story sets itself as something more classical and traditional while still being completely contemporary. Because people, we all think we're so sophisticated with the internet and everything, but we don't, like human nature doesn't really change. I think there are just simply a handful of core personalities that people get. And they're recognizable in literature because that's the purpose of literature, to explore the inner state. And this has a really, 18th century mentality somehow. It feels like an old hidebound book that's been up in a corner somewhere and forgotten and then just waiting to be rediscovered because its message never really changes. And it's only 20 years old, so that's a bad example. But it is timeless in a really specific way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that it's the simplicity for sure. And I think, approaching it as like this Western, to me, I think it feels like that. Yeah. I listened to this interview with Peter Dinklage, and he was saying that he didn't believe that Finn had ever had a friend before. Do you know what I mean? And that was the way he protected himself. Is he described it like falling in love. Like if you never fall in love, you'll never get hurt, right? And so he said he approached this character like he never wanted to have a friend. He never wanted to be that close to anybody that can hurt him. And then once he has these three friends, that's almost like the first time he realizes how important this is, and near the end, when Olivia is really struggling and he basically stalks her, like he kind of like sits on that by her house, and it's like he's kind of putting himself out there and saying, I'm going to do what it takes. And then she still rejects him. And it's like, it's hard. Like its friendship is hard. And it's like, that's that whole thing. It's like, it's better to love and lost than never to have loved at all. Like, I think that was the way he talked about approaching the character, which I thought was interesting.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the arrival of Viggo Mortensen's The Dead Don't Hurt and the great new British cinema documentary Scala, as well as Shout Studios' new 4K restoration of Werner Herzog's Aguirre, The Wrath of God. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. I had not heard that, but that makes a lot of sense in the context of that performance. It also explains a lot about the way Finn relates to Emily, who might be interested in him, but I mean, is definitely interested in him. She thinks he's great, and he just can't read her because he's
Right.
never tried to read anybody before. Right.
Right.
I think that's that awkwardness comes through on Dinklage's part, and it's great too because the one thing that Dinklage has always had as a screen presence is like he's magnetic. He's incredibly charismatic. Um, Even in a role, I'm thinking about Elf, which people would have just seen, or which came out the same year, maybe even, but is using him for his dignity, not for comedy. Like his anger is what's funny in that character, and he manages to steal the picture in those 2 minutes he has with Farrell. And here he's just required to be still and quiet. And again, it's the most interesting thing in the picture. And Patricia Clarkson is one of the great actors of her generation, and still she's ceding space to him because she gets it. Like he's just so charismatic as someone who doesn't want to have charisma. And the conflict is what's interesting. And somehow McCarthy gets that and knows that he can play it.
Yeah. Well, he said that I think he said that he had the idea and it was just for a person who was lonely. And then he remembered Peter Dinklage because he had done a play with him, I guess, a few years earlier. And then he started writing it for him specifically because of all those things that you were saying, like how magnetic he was, how handsome he was, as well. Like he's like this really handsome character. And he has this dignity in it and this protectiveness of his feelings. And he decides he wants to go be a hermit, and then like one of my favorite scenes in it is in the bar, after Patricia Clarkson says, "We're not friends. I'm not your mother. Like, get away from me." And he goes and he gets drunk in the bar, and he's so angry in that. And like I can't remember what the name of the band is. It's playing on the radio, but it's like this really dark, almost like Nine Inch Nails kind of song. And he's so angry. And they were saying like when they filmed that scene, they filmed all of it similar to the rest of the movie where the camera was really composed and things like that. And then just as they were wrapping up, the cinematographer put the camera on his shoulder and just shot everything handheld. And that's 90% of what wound up in that scene. And I for me, that scene is really incredible because everything up until that point feels like he's sort of not acting. Like it feels like he's just sort of being stoic and being grumpy and things like that. But that's where it all gets earned, is when he freaks out and he yells at everybody and he's really angry. And it's really, I found it really painful to watch. Like I felt so bad for him in that moment because I didn't think he was 100% right. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so it's like, it's, he's hurting himself,
Yeah. Well, he's venting, obviously, right? Like this is it's as close as the movie gets to catharsis to show us who this guy is inside or who he thinks he is. And it feels like, he's drunk. So it's real because that's how alcohol works. But also it feels like Finn's performance rather than Dinklage's performance. Like he is showing them what he thinks is the worst of himself.
That's right.
But he's pushing just a little too hard because like his voice is just about to crack and he's almost about to cry, but he's too mad. And it's this, I had not known that about, I mean, I knew it was a break in format. It feels different, but I didn't know that it was like basically just a last thing to try that on the day. No, if the camera isn't afraid of him in the way that a handheld camera feels nervous, then it doesn't have the same punch, right? Because if it's just watching him crack, then it's neutral. But he's so mad the movie's scared.
Like there's a line that happens earlier in the movie where Olivia says to him, like, "Have you ever been in love?" And he says that he has, and she said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, because it fell apart because I was young and because I was angry, and that's what ruined it." And so it's almost like I sort of imagine that was a time in his life where he tried loving people and it didn't work out, and he sabotaged it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
So what's happening in this is like he's repeating this, and he's so angry at himself and he's repeating these same mistakes by not trusting people. Like there's another And that's why I think the puppy dog thing by Bobby Cannavale is so important, because like him and Clea, the young girl, are these like guileless people that just see him for who he is, and he can't really accept that. And that's part of what his thing is. Like there's a part where they're eating, and Bobby Cannavale says like, are there clubs for people like you? And you can just feel the tension in that sentence. And he's like, what do you mean? And he's like, like train clubs and things like that, because he's like a little kid and he just sees him as a guy who likes trains. What I mean? And that's sort of the moment where I think Peter Dinklage starts to break, or Finn starts to break, and he's like, oh, I may have been misjudging this guy. And Clea sort of acts as like a parallel to that too.
The world of Newfoundland is hermetic in its own weird way. They don't get a lot of new people.
Mm-hmm.
They get people who come back,
right?
Like Joe, but they don't get a lot of new people. So everyone is interested in him because they would be interested anyway, because he's a stranger, as like it's the Western thing.
Oh, yeah.
But he reads it all negatively because he just can't conceive of being looked at as a human being. He looks at he's given himself so little value and so little self-worth that he can't imagine someone seeing it in him.
But I think there's a lot of parallels to today with that too, because he's just enough right that if he chooses the negative, it's there. Like he can find it. Like in the end scene when he goes and he talks to Clea's classroom, there's one little boy that says like, how tall are you? And he goes, I'm taller than you. And then the teacher kicks him out, and then another kid looks at him and she says, what about blimps? And he's like, what? Like, what about blimps? You like blimps? He's like, I don't know much about blimps. And you can tell like 90% of the kids in that room don't care. And the one kid that does care, it's like, that's who Finn focuses on in his life. He focuses on the people that stare at him, that, when those two guys shows up and one guy goes, the plane, like he focuses on those guys, not on Joe, and that line where he says the thing about the trains, if you watch it, there's something they do really great with the music there, where the second it cuts to a close-up of Finn, there's this big hit of guitar that sounds like a Western kind of hit. Do you know what I mean? Of like, oh my God, like the hero just figured something out. You know what I mean? And then that was sort of the beginning of them, him opening up to him,
Yeah. Oh, it's such a smart movie. And again, so casual about everything it does. Like it just feels like it's all just there for us to discover it. And shot in 20 days on with no money, just a bunch of actors who are now massive stars, or legends, like depending on where you're coming from. Like I had completely forgotten. I'm just looking at the cast list here because I knew I'd forget to mention them. I completely forgotten Richard Kind and Josh Pazer in this,
and they are amazing. Those two guys are so funny. Like in the director's commentary, they talk about Richard Kind in that scene, and they specifically said like, don't be funny. And he didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, that's what I do. I'm funny. He's like, no, I don't want you to be funny. And he did that because he knew he was going to be funny and the scene was funny. So if Richard Kind plays it straight, it's just going to be hilarious, which it was. And then the other guy, Josh Pazer, the guy who plays Carl, like he said that was mostly ad-libbed. And I think he said he's friends with a lot of these guys. Like as an actor, he had been friends with them. And he ad-libbed a lot of, narrating the train sequence as he's talking about it. And it's so boring. Like, it's just so painfully boring. It's like, we went to Canada, and you see the smoke, it's coming backwards because, the train's going forwards, and then the smoke obviously goes backwards. And it's all of these things that I just think were really brilliant. And when I watched it, what I got this sense of, which I also really liked, was this sense of like a film community that Tom McCarthy was part of. Like, you could tell, you just had this feeling like people were rooting for him on set, and, like John Slattery, like he's in, apparently he showed up for a day, those two guys, like, that woman that plays the woman at the convenience store, she came in for one day, just all these people were like his friends. And I love films that have that kind of, you almost get this feeling of like the fun of filmmaking. Like Edgar Wright's early films are like that too.
Mhm.
Where you watch them and you're just like, I wish I was on that set. I wish I was friends with these people. It just all seems amazing.
Yeah, it's like collective goodwill. They're all
Yeah,
just they're all. I mean, it's the thing Edgar says all the time about directing, which is that it's like coaching during tug of war. The director's job is to get the whole team to pull the rope at exactly the same tension.
that's right. Yeah.
And there's just this sense of everybody showing up, doing their best, bringing their best game, but they're also willing to have fun with it, and no one is taking the work so seriously that it suffocates it.
Right.
It just breathes in a way that's so natural and so rich and rewarding. And yeah, of course people rediscovered this, right?
And I think that's probably down to like probably Thomas McCarthy as a person, and also the script. Like people just loving the script and connecting with the script, and wanting, like almost like rooting for it. I heard Mike Nichols tell this story one time about working with Jack Nicholson, and what he said was when Jack Nicholson shows up on set, he'll become friends with everybody, like right away. Like he'll join, football pools or basketball pools. He'll share pictures of grandkids. And then when he's in the moment performing, he said there's like this feeling in the air of the entire crew rooting for him. And that affects the performance. And he said he's seen it the opposite way, where it's like, he didn't mention names, but like we're an amazing actor, but he has a really negative aura about him. And it doesn't come across as well. And like I said, for me, when I watch this film, that's part of the feeling I get is like, it feels like this small little community of friends telling this story. And that almost feels fun. Like it's almost like the filmmaking parallels the friendship of, the things there. It's
Yeah.
You're rooting for them.
Yeah. And I wonder if maybe you have to be an actor to direct a film as precise as this, like to understand the qualities of the cast and bring them out in a certain way. Just because you've been overlooked or you've seen other directors not get it over the years, and you just dedicate yourself to not doing the things that were done wrong.
I think there's absolutely like part of that's true, but I think that if you understand your script really, really well, and you know exactly what a scene is meant to do, then I think it makes it easier to work with the actors, and allow them to be, what they need to be. Like when I first started directing commercials, the woman that I worked for, she sent me down to LA to take acting classes. And I took acting classes from this woman named Judith Weston, and it was called Acting for Directors. It was not directing at all. It was literally just a class in acting. And what you get from that is what bad direction feels like. It's like, you need to look angrier. And it's like, well, my version of angrier is different than your version of angrier. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And the way I try to work with people is I try to think of myself as like a cheerleader. You know what I mean? And it's like, this is what this is supposed to be. This scene is supposed to be like this. And then it becomes collaborative at that point with the actor of like, what would this character do? Like, how would this character react in this way that's going to set up this other thing? So I think being an actor is really important in getting there. But I think being the writer and understanding it so that you can really collaborate with those people in terms of what the larger story is, for me, I feel like is the part that's really important. And I think what his really greatest strength seems to be, Tom McCarthy, is as a writer, almost before an actor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be in tune with the emotions of everyone in the room in order to write a script like this. Like all of his scripts really nothing, right. Maybe the one with Sandler, but the films he makes don't shy away from emotional conflict and people withholding and people fighting to Spotlight is all about pulling out information from people who don't want to give it. But we sympathize both with the interviewers and with the subjects, and the sort of the greater good drives the whole story. But here it's similarly three people who don't know how to communicate, learning each other's language.
Yeah.
And I think Yeah, if that's where your interests lie, then of course you're going to be a good actor too, right? Because you'll be
Oh, I
interested
think
in
so.
all of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's like what's the emotional truth of
Mhm.
it, and keeping that part authentic. When he does films like Win Win or this, it's all about the emotional truth. But when he did Spotlight, because it was historical, it also became like what's actually the truth. You know what I mean, with these characters. So that became a sort of a different exercise for him. But yeah, that's the thing I get from him in most of his films is just like, yeah, it is an actor thing. He's searching for like the truth of of how you're going to react there. And like you said, these three actors or these three characters, they don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to climb out of these holes, and that's the thing they're all sort of figuring out together.
Yeah. Well, this actually is the I've been trying to figure out the segue into Drive Back Home, but there is that central conflict, an
Mm-hmm.
unspoken conflict between two brothers who haven't seen each other in enough time that they really no longer know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, their shared history is the whole reason that they have this
Uh-huh.
gulf between them. And the film sort of fills it in very, very slowly, but it's all on the actors' faces throughout. The second time I watched it, it was so clear
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. And I mean, obviously, of course it was. I knew what was going on, but you can see the hesitations and the beats and the reactions. I know this is based on a family story of yours, but how do you give yourself the license to make it as personal and intimate when you're dealing with it as fiction? Like what responsibility did you feel to the truth?
I mean, I think it's part of what I was talking about with Tom McCarthy and this stuff. It's a lot of it's about emotional truth as opposed to like the real truth. So the real true story is that my grandfather was a plumber in New Brunswick in the 1950s, and his brother was arrested in Montreal for having sex in a park with another man. And my grandfather had to drive up and get him out, and then the two guys drove back home together. And that's sort of where, like, plot wise, the truth ends, right? But but the dynamics of them were that I would say they didn't like each other, and I tried to write the story as a story about like the question that they're asking themselves, similar to this one, is how do I love someone who I don't like, you know, and I don't want to be alone. Like I think there's like this movie was an influence for my film, as was like Banshees of Inisherin. Like I was one of the ones on my list too. But it loneliness was a big theme in that, and I think to try to answer your question, what I tried to do was to just plot this out so that they can connect each other with each other in a very slow way that feels meaningful. It's not like one thing happens and all of a sudden, oh, I figured it out, or I did this. It just sort of goes in these small little moments. And and a lot of that came from um, doing research. Like in the film, there's a scene in the diner where they briefly talk about something that happened in Montreal, and I wrote 10 pages of backstory for Alan about what happened in Montreal. And I shared that with Charlie as well, and so it's kind of like I tried to make it this world where there's a ton of stuff that happens before and after the film that everyone knows about. And then this is just this one little moment and this one little, 3-day period where they're trapped in a truck together trying to figure out how to be brothers again, and that's what the story was. And then trying to play that as honest as possible from an emotional standpoint, for me, was what was important. And both Charlie and Alan had ways in on that, where they had family relationships that paralleled this. And those are the sort of things we talked about.
It's rare to see a film that understands the value of silence and sort
Mhm.
of edgy silence because of a shared past. I was trying to think if there's a movie a little while ago that has almost no exposition because it was Alex Garland's film Civil War, where the
Oh,
characters are
right.
all journalists and they never discuss the nature of the war because they are journalists and they all know it
Mm.
and they've
Right.
lived through it. And there's no there's no expository monologues, and there's no, like, there's no newscast at the beginning that tells us what's going on. We're just thrust into this world with people who already know how to navigate it.
Right.
And it's like that with families. And it's the thing that everybody gets wrong in movies all the time. Speeches that start with, look, I've been your brother our whole lives. Like, that's the sort of dialogue that no one in the world actually speaks. It's always artifice.
Right.
And having us never fully understand the tensions between Pearlie and Weldon is great, because there's so much you can fill in with your own history, your own family. Anybody who comes to see the movie is going to bring their own experiences to it. And, it's the classic line, right? The more specific you are, the more universal the story becomes.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, I mentioned Banshees of Inisherin, like, that's on a small, tiny island, off the coast of Ireland. But I think the people that watch it and love that film connect with the characters because there's emotional truth in it. And I think all movies are about people and relationships, and stuff like that. And if you think of them that way, then it's easy to connect. Like, we've all had a friend who doesn't want to be friends with us anymore, a friend who's hurt us, and when you have that kind of familiarity with someone, it's a different way you behave, and you can way more of a jerk. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like you're past all that. And so when I was writing this, I heard this, like, I guess sort of similar to what Thomas McCarthy, like, I feel like I approached this from a writer first. And when I wrote it, it was my first screenplay. And when I wrote it, Taika Waititi had said this bit of advice where he says, you write the beginning and then you write the end, and then you try to figure out how to get that to go, that way. So that's what I did, is I basically wrote the beginning and the end, and then I did research, and I wrote backstory, and I tried to find out as much as I could about that world. So all the little moments that happen, they're not true stories, but they're anecdotally true stories based on other things, and my grandfather's not alive now. And I remember there was one moment, and I don't remember the exact scene, where something wasn't working. And I was thinking of my Uncle Gordy when I was writing it. My Uncle Gordy's a curmudgeonly guy as well. And so I was thinking about him when I wrote it, and I just went, screw it. Like, I know this isn't going to be right, but like, what would Gordy do in this exact moment, right? And so I just wrote it. And then as I was writing it, it completely fixed the problem, but it also fixed like 4 other problems that were sort of shuffling around there. And what I realized is that I wasn't being honest. You know what I mean? Like, I was trying to make it a movie, and that was the part that was hurting it. And once I stopped trying to make it a movie and I focused on making it a story, if that makes any sense, it felt like it got more honest. And almost everything that changed from there to even through the editing, I would say was doing something to try to fix honesty. You know what I mean? Like, if something didn't feel like it was true enough, and that was, a lot of it came from the actors. Like, a lot of it came from, working with those guys. There's a scene in it where, in the film, where Claire is fighting with Moses, Ada is fighting with Moses, Claire Coulter and Gray Powell. And this all came from Claire. At the end of that scene, Claire looks like she's got doubt, about whether this was a good idea or not. And that came from Claire, and it just felt really true. Like, there was this big buildup, between these two characters. And then when it ended, she was meant to be this sort of stoic, like, I'm older than you, I'm right, I'm a sage. And then Claire played it like that wasn't true at all. And when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, like, you fixed something that I didn't see, and she just fixed it by being honest. Like, Ada doesn't know everything, you know what I mean? So, and that was it. So I can't remember what the question was, but that was,
oh, that's fine. Yeah. Just the fealty to the truth. And I think you did. Yeah. I think you've explained it. And it, it feels like a true story in that it does feel spiky and rough edged and not fully resolved, but like The Station Agent, it ends in a place of hope, which David Koepp once said, I've never forgotten this, it was always his key to ending movies is that you don't go out on the happy ending, you go out on the promise of a happy ending or the potential. So it keeps you rooting for the movie while the credits roll. You're rooting for the characters.
I've never heard that, but I love that saying. Like, that's amazing. Yeah, because that's exactly what it is. Yeah, you hope that they're going to get there. When I was researching it, a good friend of mine is around my age, and he's gay, and he had gone through conversion therapy. So I talked to him a lot about some of these scenes because he could relate to it, and he helped me find sort of the emotional truth in some of these things. And one of the things he and I talked about is that at the end of this movie, Pearlie at best is 20 years away from having a healthy relationship with a man. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's something that I talked about with Alan too. And I love that. It's the promise of a happy ending. That's a great way of thinking about things.
My thanks to Michael Clowater, whose first feature, Drive Back Home, is in theaters across Canada right now and well worth your time. In Toronto, it's at the Carlton Cinema. Thanks also to Winnie Wong. She knows what she did. You can follow Michael on Instagram at mclowater, MCLOWATER, and you might still be able to find that out-of-print DVD of The Station Agent from Buena Vista Home Entertainment. It's also streaming in the US on Prime Video, MGM+, Fubo, and Hoopla. It's also available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 43 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster as soon as you can. I'll see you next week.